The HOA smugly padlocked my cow farm gate, laughing that they'd finally shut me down. But they had no idea the gate they locked was never even used, and by the time they realized the truth, it was already too late. When I first laid eyes on the property, I knew it was mine, even if I didn't fully understand why. The land seemed to breathe differently than anywhere I'd ever been. It was quiet, open, and surrounded by nature's calm, just a few miles from the edge of Willow Creek. It had been listed for almost a year with barely any offers, mostly because it bordered one of the most obnoxious HOA communities in the county, Whispering Pines. But I wasn't afraid of HOAs. I wasn't in their neighborhood, and the deed made that clear. My land sat just outside the red tape that formed their little kingdom. I double-checked the boundaries, legal clauses, and even had a zoning lawyer review the documents before I bought it. I wanted to be sure this place was going to be my piece, my restart. At 55, I'd spent most of my life working for other people, construction sites, warehouses, long nights on oil rigs. I was good with my hands, but I was tired of chasing paychecks and watching my time disappear. Farming had always been a dream, not some massive operation, just a small, manageable dairy farm with a few cows, some chickens, and enough space to work the land and live off what it gave back. This property, just over 30 acres of green pasture, a broken-down barn, and a weathered old farmhouse, gave me exactly that. I spent the first few months rebuilding. The barn needed new rafters, fresh paint, and a repaired milking station. The fencing had holes big enough to walk through, and the backwall pump was rusted to the core. But none of that scared me. Every board I hammered and every shovel of dirt I moved brought me closer to the life I'd been dreaming about for years. I worked sunrise to sunset, alone most days, except for the occasional visit from a local contractor or delivery driver. It was hard work, but honest, and I was free. By spring, I had 10 Holstein dairy cows grazing in my field, a flock of chickens scratching near the coop, and a farmhouse warm enough to finally feel like home. I named the place Cloverbell Ranch, most as a joke, but the name stuck. My neighbors were a mix of longtime locals and upper-middle-class transplants from the HOA side. Some waved politely, others stared like I was dragging their property values into the dirt. I didn't care much either way. I stayed on my land, minded my business, and got up every day to care for my animals. That's when the letters started coming. At first, it was just harmless stuff, one from the HOA's board claiming I was in violation of community standards for having livestock too close to residential homes. I laughed and threw it in the trash. I wasn't in their jurisdiction. I wasn't a member of their homeowners association, hadn't signed a single thing, and my property was zoned rural, agricultural. I figured it was some overzealous Karen who didn't like the smell of cow manure wafting over her lawn. But then a second letter came, this one marked certified. Inside was a formal notice from the HOA accusing me of creating a public nuisance, along with threats of fines and even legal action. I kept this one, called my zoning lawyer again. He confirmed what I already knew. They had no legal authority over me. Still, he advised me to document everything. These types, he warned, don't stop just because you're right. They stop when they're tired, embarrassed, or legally forced to. I installed cameras, set up motion detectors at the front gate, created logs of every cow sale, feed delivery, and shipment. I was ready, but the HOA wasn't backing down. In fact, they were just getting started soon. I started noticing strange things: tire tracks near my front gate that didn't match my truck, someone placing flyers in my mailbox at night, and cars slowing to a crawl outside my fence. Phones aimed at my cows like I was a zoo exhibit. One morning, I caught a woman in a business suit leaning over my fence with a camera. When I approached, she introduced herself as Marcia, a member of the HOA compliance committee. She said she was documenting violations and offered a smug smile like I should thank her. I told her politely but firmly to get off my land and reminded her that she had no right to be there. Her response, "You'll wish you listened to us." I didn't take it seriously. I should have. 2 weeks later, a heavy rainstorm blew through. I spent most of the evening making sure the cows were dry. The roof didn't leak and the barn doors were secure. The next morning, I woke up, grabbed my coffee, and walked toward the front of my property, and that's when I saw it. A giant red padlock had been slapped on the front gate, right beneath a laminated sign that read, "Access revoked per HOA Enforcement Policy Section 8.13. It would have been funny if it weren't so absurd. The thing is, that front gate, the one facing the HOA side, I never used it. It had been there for years, rusted, overgrown, and half falling apart when I bought the place. I kept it mostly for show, even added an old metal arch over the top for aesthetic. The actual entrance to my farm, the one I used daily, was around the back, accessible by a long dirt road through the woods that connected to a county-maintained path. I'd even laid fresh gravel last fall so trucks wouldn't get stuck after rain. So when I saw that big red lock on the Decoy gate, I laughed out loud. They thought they got me. They really believed that by slapping a lock and a fake notice on a gate I didn't use, they'd somehow shut me down. I didn't touch it. I didn't remove the sign. I didn't say a word. Let them believe they'd won. I had work to do. And I wasn't about to stop just because a group of HOA retirees thought they could push me around. But I knew something deeper now. This wasn't just petty complaining. This was a coordinated effort, and that meant Karen Whitmore had to be behind it. Karen was the president of the HOA, and she ruled Whispering Pines like a queen bee. She was in her 50s, sharp haircut, pearl earrings, and an expression like someone had permanently soured her coffee. Rumor had it she'd once tried to evict a neighbor for having a plastic flamingo on their lawn. Another story claimed she'd fined a guy $500 for painting his shutters off-shade. People feared her but not me. Still, I had to be careful. It was obvious she wasn't going to stop. And as much as I enjoyed the irony of their Decoy Gate stunt, I knew they were trying to build a case: public pressure, bad optics, anything to ruin what I was building. So I decided to play along for now. The next morning, I let the cows out as usual, cleaned the stalls, and went about my day. Meanwhile, I kept watching the front gate. Sure enough, that afternoon a small crowd gathered near it. Karen stood at the center, smiling as neighbors clapped and congratulated her. She even took a photo beside the padlock, pointing at it like she'd just nailed a mission accomplished. Banner to my front door. What they didn't know was that while they were snapping selfies at a fake gate, my cows were peacefully grazing behind a hill, totally untouched by their drama. But it gave me an idea. If they wanted to play games, I'd give them a show they'd never forget. And when the dust settled, the only thing left standing would be the truth and my farm. The day after Karen's photo op at the Decoy Gate, I started documenting everything more thoroughly. I knew what was coming. They weren't going to stop just because the gate they locked wasn't being used. No, people like Karen doubled down when their efforts backfired. She wasn't just trying to scare me off the land anymore. She was building a public narrative, one where she painted me as the unreasonable, defiant outsider, and worse, the kind who endangered her picture-perfect neighborhood with the horrors of farm smell and loose animals. So I started preparing not just to defend myself but to flip the whole thing on its head. I set up an extra set of motion-triggered trail cams along the front edge of my property and positioned one near the Decoy Gate hidden under a low-hanging branch. If anyone came by, I'd know. Meanwhile, I spent the mornings tending to my cows, who were now producing more milk than I could sell at the weekend farmers markets. The chickens had started laying like clockwork, and I'd even traded some farm-fresh eggs with a neighbor who brought me a load of reclaimed lumber. People who once avoided my property were now realizing I wasn't some backwoods hillbilly. I just didn't want to be ruled. Then the real twist came. A few days later, I got a call from Samara Blake, a journalist for the Willow Creek Weekly. She had interviewed me once before when I first moved in a small local piece about rural revival and sustainable farming. Apparently, she'd heard about the HOA's gate stunt through a few locals and found it suspicious. "Mind if I come out and take a look for myself?" she asked. I grinned and said, "Come on down. I'll even throw in a jug of fresh milk." Samara arrived the next morning, recorder in hand, notebook under one arm. She stepped out of her sedan, squinting in the sunlight, and shook my hand firmly. "So," she said, turning to look at the large red padlock on the unused gate, "this is the big scandal." I nodded. "Yup, and it's as useful as a screen door on a submarine." I walked her along the fence line to the real entrance around the back where the gravel road led to my barn and house. When she saw the setup, her eyebrows lifted. "You're telling me the HOA locked up a gate you don't even use?" "Exactly," I said. "They think they shut me down. But I've been milking cows and delivering dairy 6 days a week without a hitch. That gate they locked has been closed since before I bought the place. It's not even connected to the main drive." Samara took photos, asked a few more questions, and then we sat on my porch where I handed her a glass of cold milk. She sipped, looked at the cows in the pasture, and shook her head with a smile. "You mind if I print this?" she asked. "Go for it." The article ran 2 days later under the headline, "Locked Gate. Open Farm Rancher Outsmarts HOA in Bold Move." It didn't take long for it to make waves. People from all around Willow Creek started talking about the story. Some were angry on my behalf. Others laughed at the HOA's stupidity. But most of all, it started chipping away at the illusion Karen had built that the HOA was some kind of benevolent protector of peace and order. Karen, of course, was furious. I knew it the moment I saw her car roll slowly past my Decoy Gate. She didn't stop this time, just stared, her jaw clenched, her sunglasses hiding whatever volcano was boiling behind her eyes. The next day, I got a letter taped to the same locked gate. It was printed in bold capital letters. "Mr. Lane, you're in violation of county odor and noise ordinances. Farm operations must cease until further notice." It wasn't signed by any authority. No seal, no legal backing. Just a bluff, a desperate one. This time I called my lawyer, Rick Dorsey, and he laughed when I read it to him. "She really thinks she can bluff you out of your own land. She's running out of tricks," I said, "but I get the feeling she's not done." "She's not," Rick replied. "But here's the thing, if she keeps escalating without cause, we can push back hard, and if she forged any document or misrepresented authority to the county, that's criminal." That planted a seed in my mind. What if Karen had gone even further than I thought? That night I pulled out the camera card from the trail cam and checked the footage. There she was 2 nights ago standing near the decoy gate in the dark with 2 other people. They had flashlights, were taking photos, and at one point Karen pulled out a tape measure, acting like she was surveying the land. Then I saw something else. She handed one of the others a clipboard and gestured toward the fence as if instructing them on what to write. It wasn't the behavior of someone simply enforcing a rule. This looked planned, deliberate. I saved the footage and forwarded it to Rick. The next day a white SUV pulled into my back driveway. It wasn't a neighbor, it was a county inspector, badge clipped to his shirt and a clipboard in his hand. He introduced himself as Ron Sellers and said he was doing a follow-up on property access concerns submitted by the Whispering Pines HOA. I gave him a tour, showed him the decoy gate, then showed him the actual functioning entrance, the well-kept barn, the storage areas, the milking station, and the animals. Ron scratched his head. So, wait, they claimed this was the only entrance? Yep, and they said you were operating in violation of their bylaws. That's what they think. He looked at his clipboard, then at me. Mr. Lane, I'm going to be honest. This isn't my first visit to Whispering Pines. They've tried stunts like this before, but nothing this theatrical. From what I see here, you're in full compliance with county agricultural ordinances and the gate they locked. You could build a moat around it, and it wouldn't matter. You're not in their jurisdiction. I smiled. That's what I've been saying. He handed me a form. This is a formal acknowledgement that your operation is compliant and outside HOA control. Keep this on file. If they try anything else, you can show them this. I shook his hand and watched as he drove off. For a moment, I felt like maybe this nonsense was over. I was wrong. Later that evening, I got a call from Rick. He sounded amused, but serious. You're going to want to see this, he said. I found out who submitted the original HOA complaint to the county. Karen filed it under an altered map. What kind of alteration? She submitted a version of the zoning map that erased the section line dividing your property from Whispering Pines. It made it look like your land was included in their boundary when it never was. That wasn't just bold, it was fraud. She forged a government map, I asked, stunned. Looks that way, Rick said. I've got a copy of the official map, the one on record with the county recorder, and the one Karen submitted with her complaint. They're clearly different. Now we weren't just talking about nuisance or harassment. We were talking about felony-level falsification. Want me to file? He asked. Not yet, I said, thinking fast. I've got an idea. If Karen wanted to play dirty, then fine. I'd show her what happens when someone tries to bend reality for their own gain, because I had something she didn't, the truth, and I wasn't afraid to let the whole town see it. The morning after Rick confirmed Karen had submitted an altered zoning map, I stood at the back fence of Cloverbell Ranch, sipping coffee and watching the mist rise off the field. The cows moved slowly, tails swatting flies, heads lowered into the dew-soaked grass. Everything was calm, peaceful, but my mind was already moving faster than the sunrise. Karen Whitmore had stepped far beyond HOA pettiness. She'd committed fraud, and I had the proof. Still, I didn't want to file charges just yet. That felt too easy, too clean. No, I wanted everyone to see what kind of manipulative empire Karen was running. She had played this game in the shadows long enough. It was time to flip the spotlight on Dot. So I called Samara Blake again. I've got something big, I said. Bigger than the fake gate? She asked, half-joking. I chuckled. Try forged maps, false claims to government offices, and tampering with county records. She was silent for a moment. I'll be there in 2 hours. When Samara arrived, I handed her a folder with the comparison documents Rick had sent me. She opened it right there on the porch. The look on her face turned from curious to stunned within 30 seconds. This isn't just HOA overreach, she said, flipping between the real zoning map and Karen's doctored version. This is a crime, exactly. But if I go straight to the sheriff, it's just a legal case. People will forget about it in a month. But if this story breaks first, the whole town will see what she's really been doing. Samara nodded slowly. You want the court of public opinion before I take it to the real court? She agreed and asked to film a few short clips with me, nothing dramatic. Just honest footage of me explaining how my property is zoned, where the boundaries are, and how the HOA tried to twist reality. We walked to the front of the property, standing next to the still locked decoy gate. This is the gate the HOA locked, correct? Yep, I said, pointing to the padlock. But I've never used it. My actual entrance is over there, behind the tree line. They locked this for show. Do you believe this was a publicity stunt? I believe it was a staged move by someone who's used to getting their way, even if it means bending the law. That afternoon, Samara published an online article titled, Forged Boundaries, HOA Leader Caught Altering Official Maps to Seize Control. The article included side-by-side zoning maps, quotes from me and Rick, a statement from the county inspector, Ron Sellers, and even screenshots from the trail cam showing Karen measuring my fence at night. Within hours, the story exploded on social media. By sunset, people in Willow Creek were furious, not just HOA members, but everyday residents who finally saw the level of deception Karen had used to hold power over them for years. Karen naturally panicked. The first sign of her unraveling came when she called a special meeting at the Whispering Pines clubhouse the very next day. I wasn't invited, of course, but that didn't matter. Half the people who attended recorded the whole thing on their phones. One of those recordings ended up in my inbox by evening. The video opened with Karen standing stiffly behind a podium, her voice overly sweet but trembling slightly at the edges. "There's been a misunderstanding involving documents submitted to the county," she said. "Our intention was to ensure community standards were upheld. Unfortunately, an error was made when referencing the zoning boundaries, lies thin ones." She claimed her assistant had submitted the wrong version of the map and insisted it was a mistake, not a forgery. But then she made her real mistake. She doubled down on the gate story. "We acted in the interest of our community," she said, "by temporarily securing a property entrance that we believed was not. We had every right to enforce standards." That sent the room into a stir. You could hear people murmuring on the recording. One woman stood up and asked, "Even if it wasn't your jurisdiction?" Karen stammered, "We believed it was. That's when it really fell apart." Another attendee stood and shouted, "You knew. You forged a map. You trespassed and tried to lock down land that wasn't yours." The video ended with Karen banging the gavel and abruptly ending the meeting, her face red and furious. It was too late. The damage was done. 2 days later, Rick called with a grin in his voice. Karen's HOA board just had 2 resignations. One cited ethical concerns. The other called her leadership a public liability. "She's losing her grip," I said. "And now," he continued, "we can file the official complaint with the county attorney. The forgery, the fake gate lock, the harassment, it's all in your favor." I agreed. But I had one more move to make first. I contacted Ron Sellers again, the county inspector, and asked if he'd be willing to speak publicly about his visit and the HOA's false claims. He hesitated at first, but eventually agreed to give a written statement for the record. That, paired with Samara's article and the trail cam footage, made our case ironclad. Then I did something Karen never expected. I held an open farm day. I set up tables with cheese, fresh milk and eggs, made signs that said, "Come see the farm the HOA tried to shut down, and meet the cows Karen can't control." Locals showed up by the dozens, families, kids, even a few former HOA members. I gave tours, let kids feed the chickens, and handed out information about zoning laws and rural land rights. By the end of the day, I had sold out of every dairy product I had. More importantly, I'd turned Cloverbell Ranch into a symbol, not just of independence, but of resistance to petty tyranny. Karen, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it she was hiding in her house, avoiding cameras, board members, and reporters. Several homeowners from Whispering Pines began organizing a petition to remove her from the board entirely. It looked like the queen bee was about to be dethroned that night. As I sat on the porch watching the moon rise over the field, I heard a familiar crunch of tires on gravel. It was Rick, pulling up with a manila folder in hand. He got out, handed it to me, and said, "This is it. All signed, all sealed. The official filing is in. The county prosecutor's opening an investigation." I looked through the documents. Everything was there: fraudulent misrepresentation, falsifying public records, illegal interference with private property, charges that could carry fines, even jail time if proven in court. "Think she'll run?" I asked. Rick shook his head. "No, people like her never run. They cling to their position, even when the whole house is on fire." We both laughed quietly. As he drove off, I looked out across my land, my cows resting peacefully, the barn quiet, the night breeze rustling through the trees. Karen had tried to shut me down with lies and tricks, but all she'd really done was show the whole town what kind of neighbor she truly was. And as for me, I was still standing, still milking, still free. 2 weeks after the county launched its investigation into Karen Whitmore, the air in Willow Creek shifted. People who once held their tongues around HOA matters now spoke up, loudly and often. The Whispering Pines Facebook group turned into a wildfire of angry comments, screenshots, and resignation letters. Karen had become more than just a community nuisance. She had become the face of everything broken about HOA abuse of power. But while her little empire crumbled, I had my eyes set on something else entirely: building back better. I wasn't just going to survive Karen's war on my farm, I was going to thrive in spite of it. The local support I'd gained since the open farm day was overwhelming. Parents asked if I'd offer farm tours monthly. Schools called about bringing field trips. A local bakery asked if they could buy my milk in bulk. Even a small grocery cop from the next town over expressed interest in carrying Cloverbell Ranch branded dairy products. That gave me an idea. The barn needed repairs. The fencing could use updating, and I had long wanted to convert the old grain shed into a walk-in farm store. With the exposure I'd gotten and the fact that Karen's attempt to shut me down backfired so publicly, this was the perfect time to expand. But there was one more thing I had to deal with first. Karen hadn't been seen publicly in days. Her house looked dark most evenings. One of her neighbors, who I'd met during the open farm day, told me that Karen had fired her landscaper and stopped picking up her mail. She's hiding from something. The woman said, "Yeah, the truth." Despite her silence, her legal team was doing the opposite. They had filed a countersuit against me for defamation and unlawful business interference. I almost laughed when I read it. Apparently exposing her lies and forgery was considered interference. Fortunately, Rick had already prepared for this. We filed a motion to dismiss based on hard evidence and public records. The county prosecutor also submitted their findings to the judge. Karen's maps were officially declared materially altered for sale. The judge rejected her countersuit in under a week. After that loss, Karen had no more moves left, at least none above ground. One chilly morning, I stepped outside to find the lock on my actual gate, the one behind the tree line. Someone had taken a crowbar to it in the night. The metal was bent and twisted, pieces of the latch still lying in the grass. Footprints led away into the forested edge of my land, and I could see where a pair of tires had peeled out, throwing dirt onto the main road. They weren't just being sneaky anymore, they were angry. I installed new cameras that same day. Higher quality, thermal sensors, live feed. Rick also came by and helped me file a formal police report, just to make sure there was documentation in case Karen or one of her supporters tried anything else. "You think it was her?" he asked. "I think it was someone doing her dirty work," I replied. "But it doesn't matter, I'm not playing defense anymore." The next morning I called Samara again. This time, I didn't just want her to write an article, I wanted a full video documentary. We filmed over the course of 4 days. Interviews with neighbors, local business owners, ex-HOA board members, and even Ron Sellers, the zoning inspector. I walked her through the timeline: Karen locking the gate, forging the maps, lying to the community. We even included footage from the trail cam showing the break dash and dot by the end. It wasn't just a story about my farm, it was a story about resilience. Samara titled the documentary, "The Fence They Couldn't Control: A Rancher's Stand Against HOA Tyranny." When it premiered online, it didn't just go local, it went viral. The comments poured in from all over the country. People in other HOA-ruled neighborhoods started sharing their own horror stories. Farmers, ranchers, even suburban homeowners rallied in support. A rural land advocacy group reached out and asked to feature my story at their national conference. Another group offered legal aid to anyone fighting similar cases. Karen, for once, was completely outnumbered, and yet, even as the walls closed in, she still refused to step down. A vote was scheduled to remove her from her position as president of the HOA, but she delayed it twice, citing personal medical leave. But people were tired of waiting, so the board called an emergency vote without her. It was unanimous. Karen Whitmore was officially removed as HOA president on a cold Tuesday morning. Later that day, I got a call from the new interim president, a kind older man named Ellis who lived across the lake. "I want you to know," he said, "we're rescinding the complaint against your property. We're dissolving the enforcement committee she abused, and we'll be issuing a public apology on behalf of the board." That meant a lot, more than I expected it to. For a while, fight had made me cynical, bitter, but hearing those words, it reminded me that not everyone in Whispering Pines was the enemy. Some were just misled, others were silent too long. Now, they were trying to make it right. The next Saturday I hosted another open farm event. This one was bigger. We had live music, hay rides, a barbecue pit, and a banner that read, "Welcome to the farm they couldn't shut down." People came from all around Willow Creek, and even a few neighboring towns. Kids laughed, parents relaxed, and I stood there watching the barn lights glow as the sun dipped behind the trees, knowing full well that Karen could no longer touch what I had built. Where she did show up. Late in the evening, I saw a silver SUV pull onto the gravel road and park near the edge of the field. Karen got out. She looked thinner, older, diminished. No makeup, no clipboard, just a bitter scowl behind dark sunglasses. I walked over slowly, stopping just short of the fence. She looked around at the people, families smiling, cows grazing, music playing, and then looked at me. "This isn't over," she said, voice low and sour. "Yes," I replied. "It is," she sneered. "You humiliated me." "No," I said calmly. "You did that to yourself." I just held up the mirror. She didn't have a response, just turned, walked back to her SUV and drove off without another word. And that was the last time I saw her that night. I sat under the stars with Rick and a few friends, drinking sweet tea and laughing. The cows snored softly in the background. A couple of kids roasted marshmallows near the fire pit. We had won. Not because we fought harder, but because we stood for something true. Karen tried to shut down a cow farm. What she didn't know was the gate she locked. That was just a decoy. The real entrance, it was always open. Open to growth, to truth, to community. And no HOA on earth was ever going to close it again. Spring came earlier than usual that year. By mid-March, the fields had already shed their icy shell, and soft green buds poked through the thawed soil like whispers of hope. The cows basked lazily in the warming sun, and the wind carried the scent of clover across the rolling pasture. It felt like the land itself was exhaling, finally free from the weight of conflict. It had been 3 months since Karen Whitmore was ousted from the HOA board and vanished from community life. Though she hadn't faced criminal charges thanks to a carefully negotiated settlement with the county, her days of control were over. Her house was now up for sale, and rumor had it she moved to another state to start fresh. I didn't care where she went, as long as she stayed gone. What mattered more was what had risen in the ruins of her reign. Whispering Pines had changed. The new HOA board, led by Ellis and 2 newly elected members, adopted a completely different tone: collaborative, transparent, and neighborly. They held town halls in the community center, invited open discussion, and most importantly, stopped targeting residents with weaponized rulebooks. I received a formal apology letter from the board, signed by all 3 members, acknowledging the misuse of HOA authority and the personal targeting I had endured. They even offered to pay for some of the damage done to my property, including the gate that had been smashed in the night. I politely declined the money. It wasn't about reimbursement, it was about closure. Instead, I asked for something different: an amendment to the bylaws that would prevent any future HOA board from enforcing zoning regulations that were not legally within their jurisdiction. In short, no more fake property lines, no more fabricated power. The board voted unanimously to approve it. That small legal amendment may not have looked like much on paper, but it was the wall that kept tyrants out. On the ranch, things were blooming in every sense of the word. My new on-site farm store was finally finished. Built inside the old grain shed, it now featured rustic wood shelving, a walk-in cooler for fresh milk and butter, and a little corner where kids could pet a calf named Buttercup. A hand-painted sign outside read, "Cloverbell Creamery, fresh from the land that fought back." Tour groups from local schools stopped by weekly. A homeschooling collective even asked if they could use the ranch as part of their agricultural education program. Some weekends, the parking lot was full of cars from 3 counties over. The most surreal moment came when a major outdoor living YouTube channel asked to interview me. They wanted to film a special titled "Backyard Tyrants: How One Farmer Beat the HOA." I agreed. Of course, I'd promised myself I wouldn't stay quiet anymore. The interview aired in April and exploded online. Overnight, I became a symbol of something bigger: everyday people standing up to overreach, reclaiming their land, their rights, and their peace. That video led to something I never expected: speaking invitations. At first, I thought they had the wrong guy. I wasn't a politician or a lawyer, I was just a guy with cow's land and a locked fake gate. But people wanted to hear how I outsmarted the system without ever breaking the law, so I went. I stood on stages in county halls, civic centers, and even at an agricultural university. I told them what I'd learned. The loudest voice in the room isn't always right. The clipboard isn't always the law. And sometimes, the best defense is a clever distraction and a whole lot of stubborn. But through it all, I never lost focus on the farm. Every morning still started the same: before the sun, before the emails, before the news crews. I checked the cows, filled their troughs, brushed their backs, and walked the fields with my boots in the mud. That quiet connection, the rhythm of the earth, reminded me who I really was beneath all the noise. This place wasn't just my home anymore, it was proof that you can fight back with integrity, that you can lose a battle and still win the war. That truth, when backed by action, is louder than any lie on paper. The community didn't just return, they rallied. The same neighbors who once whispered behind closed doors now came to Sunday cookouts, helped repaint the barn, and asked how they could support local agriculture. One guy who once signed Karen's petition against me even dropped off a dozen homemade pies with a note that said, "For what it's worth, I was wrong. This farm makes our town better." I didn't hold grudges. I accepted the pies. It all came full circle one morning in late spring. I was up early, sipping black coffee in the rocking chair by the farmhouse porch, when a familiar truck pulled into the driveway. It was Rick, grinning from ear to ear with a manila folder tucked under one arm. "You ready for this?" he asked. I raised a brow. "For what?" He handed me the folder. "Your official paperwork. Cloverbell Ranch has now been designated a certified agricultural education site by the state." I blinked. "You're kidding." "Nope," he chuckled. "You're now not just a farmer, you're an educator. And they'll be listing you on the state's rural learning trail map." Leaned back and exhaled slow. From illegal livestock to official state recognition in less than a year. That's one heck of a ride. "Some folks build walls," he said. "You built a bridge. Just happened to be behind a decoy gate." We both laughed until our ribs hurt. Later that evening, I walked down to the edge of the field, past the barn, and the now iconic fake front gate that had caused so much trouble. I left it standing, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder. I even added a small wooden sign above it. "This gate shut me down. My faith built 10 more. Then I walked around to the real entrance, the one Karen had never touched, and let the evening breeze roll across my skin. This land wasn't just free, it was mine, and it was staying that way forever. If you loved this real, powerful journey of justice, land, and resilience, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel Bright Reality, where true stories always find a voice. Your support helps us bring more untold stories into the light.